Alright, so here we are on lesson 6, rational numbers on the number line. So before we get going with our examples here, I do want to have you write down a little definition here of a rational number, just so we remember. So a rational number, those are positive and negative, fractions, and decimals. And remember, this already includes whole numbers because whole numbers can be written as a fraction anytime because they're always over 1. So now that we have that, we're going to look at our examples here. It says to write the decimal equivalent of each fraction. So we know our place value for decimals as, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So we want to have our denominator always be something along those lines. So I'm going to make this over 10 by 1/2. So that means I'd have to multiply the bottom by 5 and the top by 5. So I would have 5/10. Right, but now I need to write it as a decimal, and we know that we can write 5/10 as 0.5. If we look at part B here, we have 4/5. Again, I want to write it as tenths. So this time I'm going to multiply by 2 on the bottom and on the top. So I would have 8/10. So if I wrote that as a decimal, I would have 0.8. Okay, and then if we look at part C, don't worry too much about the whole number. We're going to look at the fraction first. And this already is in tenths. So if we're going to write it as a decimal, 6 is our whole number, point, and if we wrote 7/10, it would be 6.7. Okay, so remember we always want the denominator as 10 or 100 or 1,000, something that we know our place values of. Kind of like when we were going into percents. Alright, so now we're going to look at number 2 here. It says to write the fraction equivalent of each decimal. So our trick is to always say it out loud. So if we read this one out loud, this is 42 hundredths. So we would have 42 over 100. But then we do need to simplify. So I see both of these are even, so I'm going to start with dividing by 2. If I divide by 2 on the top and on the bottom, I'd get 21 over 50. And this is as low as we can go. So our final answer would be 21/50. Right here, again, with the whole number, that means we're just going to have a mixed number. So we'd have 3 and 75 hundredths this time. So if we're going to simplify, I know I can divide 75 and 100 both by 25. So now my simplified version would be 3 and 3 over 4. Okay, and then our last one here, again, we're going to have a mixed number. So we'd have our 36 as our whole number. And then here, we know that this is, because of that 0, this now is in the hundredths, so that would be 91 hundredths. And then if we're going to simplify, we can use our 0 trick by just crossing those 2 off. So we would get 36 and 9/10, which we cannot simplify anymore. Alright, so that's kind of a bit of a review. So now if we flip over to the next page, it talks about graphing rational numbers. And I know your top looks a little bit different than mine, but that's okay. Alright, so what we're going to do is this part here where it says locate and graph the number 3/10 and its opposite on a number line. Alright, so I'm going to put in here up above, yours already has it, the -1 and the 1, and then my 0 should be somewhere around here. I might have to move it. Okay, so they want us to put down 3/10. So from 0, it'd be 1, 2, 3 places over. Right, this would be 3 over 10. So that means we are going to count by tenths each time. So we'd have 1/10, 2/10. This would be 3. 4, I'm going to start skipping so we can read it. 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and then we know that 1 whole would be 10/10. Alright, so I'm going to put a point here, do it in a different color, 3/10. I'm going to call this point A, and now its opposite, if we think about what we did in the last lesson, would be -3/10. So this would be negative 1/10, negative 2/10, negative 3/10, negative 4, negative 5/10, negative 6, this would be negative 7/10, negative 8, negative 9/10, and then negative 10/10. So our opposite point would be here at negative 3/10, and I'm going to call this point B. Alright, so I want you to write yourself a note here that each segment is 1/10. Alright, so that's all we need to do for that one. So we're going to look at this last exercise here, and this will be the last thing we do all together. So it says to use what you know about the points negative 7/4 and its opposite to graph them both on the number line. Okay, so first I'm going to put in my 0, should be somewhere around here. Alright, and then I'm going to start counting. We're going to use our denominator by fourths. So this would be 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. This would be 4/4, which we also know is 1. And then 5/4, 6/4, 7/4, and then 8/4, which we also know is 2. Alright, then I'm going to go back in the opposite direction in the negatives the same way. Negative 1/4, negative 2/4, negative 3/4, negative 4/4, which we know would be negative 1, and then negative 5/4, negative 6/4, negative 7/4, and negative 8/4, which would be negative 2. So now we need to plot the points negative 7/4, which is down here. I'm going to call this A, and its opposite, which if we go over to the other side would be positive 7/4, which is B. Alright, now we're just going to go in and fill in the blanks. So on the number line, each segment would have an equal length of 1/4, which is what we counted by. In the fraction negative 7/4, the numerator is negative 7 and the denominator is 4. Okay, so then it's asking us which two integers is that between. And if we look up here, remember integers were positive and negative whole numbers. So that means the fraction is located between negative 2 and negative 1. Okay, so if you want to write yourself a note, remember integers are positive and negative whole numbers. So that's why it's between negative 2 and negative 1. Okay, down here below in this blank space, I want you to try something on your own. I want you to plot 1 2/5 and its opposite. So write that down, and then you're going to draw in your own number line. Alright, remember, you're going to put 0 in the middle. Going to need a 1 and a 2, and then over here you're going to need a negative 1 and a negative 2. Alright, so I want you to try this part on your own, and then we'll go over in class all together tomorrow.